everyone. Digital Logan here, helping you find success in analog life. Is inflation transitory? Is it accelerating? What can we expect in the future? These are super important questions right now. And if you're like me, I'm not sure I trust institutions to give us the honest answer on what's going on in the country and around the world. So I thought what I would do would be to look at some analysis of prior crises over the last 20 years that involved money printing and to look at the results from that. Let's start with some analysis on asset inflation by Lynn Alden. If you guys don't know Lynn Alden, I'd look her up. She's pretty brilliant. She's a former engineer turned kind of data analyst and economist, and she does, phenomenal analysis on the economy today. This is pulled from her article on asset inflation. Looks like she just grabbed this from the St. Louis Fed. I thought it was a really good example of what's been going on over the last 20 years as we add money into the economy. So if you're looking at this graph, I like to just kind of trace it to 2000, and you see a lot of action. So you see the dot-com bubble, and as a result, we enter into a recession, which the Fed lowers interest rates, looks like to near zero, about 1%, maybe a little more. So you get a bunch of cheap money entering the economy, and then you see this spike in net worth percent of GDP, right? And those are super correlated when you look at those curves. You see the Fed raise interest rates, and then you see another crash being the housing crisis in 2008. And then interest rates hit about zero, and you see this net worth percent of GDP just go to the moon. So let's talk about what net worth percent of GDP is, what's included in that, and why it's associated with essentially free money being injected into the economy. So let me read how Lynn defines household net worth and her analysis on really what has happened with money printing in the US in the past. So as for this chart, she says household net worth includes stocks, bonds, cash, real estate, and other assets minus liabilities like mortgages and other debts. Asset price inflation often happens during periods of high wealth concentration and low interest rates. If a lot of new money is created, but that money gets concentrated in the upper echelons of society for one reason or another, then that money can't really affect consumer prices, so the CPI, too much, but can instead lead to speculation and overpriced buying of financial assets. Think of it like this. If the government and central bank were to create $1 trillion new dollars and give the 100 richest people in the country an extra $10 billion each with that money, what would they spend it on? All of their physical needs and desires are met many times over already. They're not going to eat better, travel more, or really do anything different in terms of personal consumption than they're already doing. Instead, they'll buy more financial assets like stocks or real estate and push those prices up with this extra demand. This money won't go out and push the prices of things like copper or beef up. So Lynn's point so far is that inflation has been happening for the last 20 years. It's just that it's been happening actually in asset prices. And I believe since 2008, she actually states that it's around 7% asset inflation annually since 2008. That's pretty wild. That changes things in the US a lot. That drives a lot of inequality, especially when you think about how most assets are owned by the top 10% of wealth holders in the United States. So their wealth is appreciating by 7% annually, while those of us who rely on cash and don't hold assets are actually missing out and getting priced out of those assets. So that explains a lot about our country's current state. I would also like to bring up a point that I think affects how inflation will act today. And one way that we have managed the prices of consumer goods is by outsourcing the manufacturing of those consumer goods. So anytime we have potentially seen rises in consumer prices, what the government has done is it has incentivized outsourcing of manufacturing of consumer goods. And this has done a very effective job of blinding the American public to inflation. We go to Target, we go to Walmart, we shop for everyday goods, our electronics, our clothes. All of these things are cheap because They have been outsourced and are essentially being manufactured with an input of slave labor rather than American manufacturers dealing with the money printing and higher prices and raising the prices in the stores. We have added a deflationary effect to the consumer prices by outsourcing these input costs, and therefore it looks like prices are stable on consumer goods, but I think there's been a lot of deflation in the system, and the government has actually printed on top of that. We're just not able to see it. And let me show you some examples. I know this graphic is a little bit laughable, but this is a graph up top of the CPI for all urban consumers. And you see a nice timeline there from about 1920 to 2020. The graph on the bottom is all manufacturing jobs in the US. The reason it's so small is I matched up to the timeline of the graph up top. This is from 1980 to 2016. And you'll notice that from 1920 to 1980, anytime we print money in World War I, World War II, and the 70s inflation, consumers actually feel it, right? That's the CPI. Those are goods just commonly found in your neighborhood store. And consumers are feeling the effects of that money printing. Afterwards, you don't see it at all. And our money printing has only increased over time. So this is pretty strange. What I am suggesting is monetary policy was fairly stable from 1980 to 2000. We had some crashes, but I don't think the money printer was necessarily, spinning as it is as of the last 20 years. But you start to see those manufacturing jobs start to drop starting in the 1980s and going really hard there just prior to 2000. And so what this is suggesting is that really goods should be getting a whole lot cheaper. Let's remember, guys, these are manufacturing jobs in the United States where people are paid a reasonable wage, and then they're being shipped over internationally, primarily to China, for, and people are getting paid cents on the dollar in order to produce products. So they're essentially, providing that slave labor input, which should be dramatically lowering the cost of consumer goods. And yet consumer goods seem to remain stable. We go to Target, we go to Walmart, these prices so far in the 2000s have not gotten out of control. And this seems to be a major reason why, is anytime prices increase, costs increase in the US, we are able to outsource our input costs and manage the prices of consumer goods. So why is this so significant? The government has been able to hide the negative effects of money printing, which has had very real negative effects on consumers. We no longer have access to assets as we used to, which are the primary vehicle for building wealth in this country historically, right? That's sort of the American dream, to work hard and buy a house and, have stocks and have all of that appreciate over time. And you retire at 60 and live the good life. That's deteriorating. Also, my points with the shifting of input costs abroad. The reason that is significant is if you look at what I've pulled here from the Population Reference Bureau, these are the top jobs that are looking to be outsourced over the next 5 years. Notice how none of these are really contributors to manufacturing anymore. And the reason that that's significant is it seems like the jig is up, right? The government has been able to shift input costs abroad to hide inflation, and they no longer have the same ability to do so. There are certainly manufacturing jobs I believe that they can continue to send overseas, but it is that pool is shrinking. And the jobs that they're sending over now are more white-collar jobs. And thanks to Zoom, we now have a global labor market. We don't have a United States labor market. They can hire software developers in India. They can do project management from someone in the Middle East. They can do anything that they want. They can hire people from all over the world for wages that are way lower than what an American worker would ask for. And so they're starting to shift are white collar jobs overseas, but I do not believe that this will have the same effect of hiding inflation as when we shifted our blue collar positions abroad. These positions, to me, will lower the costs for tech companies, but not necessarily manufacturing companies, which is the big issue here. I don't see that these positions will, by shifting them overseas, I don't see them lowering the cost of consumer goods. I don't see them, stabilizing the CPI. I see them as kind of improving the bottom line on corporations and therefore raising their stock price. So it's good for asset prices. It's maybe good for a PE ratio, which even that's debatable. They're all trash at the moment. But I don't see this being functional for reducing the CPI anymore. It seems like the game is up. That we're not going to be able to shift costs anymore. They're as low as they can be, and unless we can come up with a really serious robotics and AI solution over the next even 3 years, which it doesn't seem like we're quite there yet, then it's very reasonable to see consumer prices to rise. Not to mention that we're seeing supply shocks in oil. You're seeing potentially global inflation games with that boat that got stuck in the Suez Canal. That was a very certainly could be a coincidence, but it seems like we're sort of playing scarcity games internationally, which means international players are aware of how much money printing has been going on, and they might be trying to catch folks by making sure that scarcity seeps into the consumer products of an economy and cause inflation and cause disruption, social disruption, and political turmoil. So keep an eye out, guys. Definitely check your sources. I would have way more than people on MSNBC telling you what's going on in the world with inflation. I think it's going to get a lot worse. And so, again, please like and subscribe. I'll go through my game plan on preserving my wealth and building my wealth during this period. And, I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.